All right, welcome to the first of what will be hopefully many weekly summary. These, remember, are just kind of like review podcasts. And in this case, I believe it's from our August 16th through the 26th, so a couple of weeks. We do try to do these every week. But with school just starting, decided to put a couple of weeks into one. So, just as a reminder, what this weekly summary usually does is just try to give you a taste of what we did throughout the week. I will try to put up major slides, bits of information, those kinds of things that we talk about in class. If you're gone, I think it's helpful to get a sense of what we did. In this case, like for this weekly summary, I will have the notes that we did, at least on the causes of the Industrial Revolution. What you would do, I'm going to obviously not wait on the slides so that you could write them down in your notes, but pausing it to be able to get those notes would be a good thing. So obviously we started off the year talking about the classroom rules, and again, I don't want to spend a lot of time with that, but I do want to keep in mind, I do want you to keep in mind a couple of things about it, and again, I think we kind of talked about this, the idea of respecting each person, criticizing only ideas, not people. We're going to do a lot of discussion in class. I'm going to try to get you to discuss in class. That comes down here to this number 5. But in doing that, I want to make sure that people feel like they can talk in here and not be made fun of, not be ridiculed, not be laughed at. And so that's one of those things that Ms. Coles and I will really watch for over this semester. The other thing that we mention, and just mention it very briefly again, is this a culture of learning and inquiry is expected at all times. And all that means is, just I want people to come in and be able to say they're interested in things and to ask questions and to hopefully ask questions that myself or Miss Coles doesn't know, and we have to kind of look at them together. But again, for people to feel like they can do that in class and not be made fun of and so forth. We also talked about at the beginning this idea of this quote, people are only as happy as they make up their minds to be. That really is something that I want you to keep in mind in the class. We're going to try a lot of different things. We're going to try some things technology-wise. We're going to try some things group-wise. And as always, you're going to like some things, you're going to not like other things. But coming into class, being willing to do what we ask you to do, not being that kind of negative person, as we said, that too cool for school crowd kind of thing. I mean, it really is come in, try to enjoy the class, try to have an open mind about things. In terms of procedures, again, this is I'm showing you this will be a little bit hard to read for some of you, but just making sure that you look over the procedures. And, there is a P grade. And if you look at the P grade criteria, again, that I showed you, it stands for participation, effort, and attitude. We are going to encourage you to participate, but the grade is not just about participation. There's the effort portion and the attitude portion. And as I said in class, this P grade really is a way of giving people credit who do what they need to do for the class. Maybe they don't do as well on test, but they're always willing to provide good classroom feedback. And again, there is a difference between just talking just to talk and to actually provide something to class. So that P grade is important to look at. Note-taking, and I cannot stress this enough, you've already had a couple of examples of this. Really, the homework revolves around, I would say 9 times out of 10, revolves around reading something, and the expectation is that you take notes on everything that you read. Most of the time, myself or Mrs. Coles will give you some questions to go from. That's what's happened up to this point. That's how you need to focus on the reading aspect. And in fact, if we just to remind what we're getting at here, These were two questions that, as you read the packet on the Industrial Revolution, you were asked to consider these two questions. Well, the considering the two questions is, as you read, these are the two things that you're taking notes on, and that will be a regular part of the class throughout the year. It's just, and as we talked about, people being frustrated that they will read something and they can't remember what they read. That's what taking the notes is trying to avoid. You don't have to memorize those things then. And again, remember, then you get to use your notes for those quizzes. Okay, in terms of kind of the content, what we started off doing for about 3 days is kind of reminding you about American history through the Civil War. Remember, in this class, we're going to start with the Industrial Revolution and the late 1800s, but we do as a department feel like you do need to have that kind of reminder, that thought process going through your head about where we've come from as a country. And the example we used here, if you look at this timeline of American history, understanding these kind of 5 big areas of American history, that from exploration, as and as we go this way, as we progress through the timeline, you start to see us developing more and more as a country. We obviously start to have some issues. We had some issues throughout our country's history up to the Civil War. Obviously, you fight the Civil War, and you're hopefully solving some of those. But the point here being, if you understand where we've come from, you understand a little bit about us when we talk about, okay, here we are starting right here. Well, it's similar to a person. If you don't understand where that person came from, what their home life was like, who their parents are, you're not really going to understand them at this point in time. And so that was kind of the whole point of dealing for the first 3 days with that, watching some of those video clips from the Story of Us. One big thing we talked about, and I think it's hard to pass this up, is expansion and that role that expanding across the country provided. And again, this kind of mess, if you were in class, you'll know what this means. These spaces between, I guess they're not all green, the idea that we had this whole big frontier and the impact that going to this new frontier, each group of people, each succession of people, it makes them a different set of people. And so as Americans, one of the things that we tend to have in our history is this idea of the frontier and those things, whether it's survival or hardworking or inventive, this idea of manifest destiny and the importance of that idea that we had this we felt like we had this God-given right to expand from the East Coast to the West Coast, and then the impacts that has. We may look at, and I say we, Americans, non-Native Americans might look at this and say, well, yeah, actually not a bad, it's a good thing. Look, we've got the whole country, but then you start taking into account what that does to the Native Americans, so that role that expansion has played in our country. So we then moved into the first real unit that we call the shuns, and again, we're going to deal with these 5 particular areas within the unit. And then we kind of had that overall conversation about, an industrial revolution being a major change. This is going to change the way that our society operates. We're going to go from 98% of the people in the country living in a farming kind of rural area to almost flip-flopping that now, where you have by far most people living in more of an urban setting and very few people farming. That's that idea of the Industrial Revolution. And so we're going to look at the start of that, the early Industrial Revolution. And then, we provided some examples of, because we've lived after the Industrial Revolution, we all have. It's hard to imagine what it would be like, but we use the example of buying our clothes. I mean, we go to the store, we buy clothes, they're not handmade, so and clothes are relatively cheap. You have 15 or 20 outfits, maybe some of you more than that. And you wouldn't have done that before the Industrial Revolution. You would have had the 3, 4, maybe 5 outfits. You weren't disposable before the Industrial Revolution. In other words, you had a pair of pants that had a hole in them. You didn't just, or a pair of shoes that had a hole in them, you didn't just throw them away. We tend to do that today. Back then, before the Industrial Revolution, it's just that it really does truly revolutionize the way we live. We then, again, as I showed you, just a reminder, we did this writing, and I put it up there. Just this writing, if you look at it, relates directly to those 2 questions that were given. So again, if you took notes on these 2 things, this writing should have been not as challenging, obviously, than if you didn't read it. But what we did do is gave you that reading that dealt with these 6 causes of the Industrial Revolution. And so again, in this podcast, I'm not going to go through again and cover every single cause. What you need to be able to do is not just list them, but be able to discuss the overall importance. How did these have to do with the start of the Industrial Revolution? So, I'll put the notes here. Obviously, if you want to go and copy them down, you'll just want to pause them if you were gone or whatever. So you've got Civil War, you have that role of natural resources, and in that reading, it gave you, different graphics. I think looking at those and oil production, you can just see that dramatic increase in oil production, that role of that particular natural resource during the Industrial Revolution. The availability of capital and labor. You have to have money, which is capital. You have to have labor, which is people to work in those factories. So again, we've got that going on during the Industrial Revolution. The idea that the government is going to encourage industry is going to play a big part in that coming of the Industrial Revolution. Technology invention, which when I ask you to put down the top 2, every class said technology and invention was the most important thing. All those new inventions that are allowing for more efficient mass production, cheaper products. And then that business leadership, you had to have people that were willing to risk, in most cases, everything. They're willing to risk everything to start the steel industry, to start the oil industry. And we're going to spend more time on this on Monday and Tuesday when we start talking about these business leaders. But the United States had those people that were willing to take those risks. We then turn to looking at different kinds of businesses. And again, this is kind of what we ended with on Friday, so I'll put this here, is, there are really 3 different ways if you're going to conduct business and you're going to try to make a profit, which is what capitalism is all about. You tend to have 3 different ways of being able to do that. These 2, and I want to stress, I don't know that I mentioned this on Friday, proprietorships and partnerships absolutely still exist. But if you're going to have an industrial society where you're going to need to produce, and you're going to be able to produce thousands and thousands and thousands of products either a day or a week, you have to have a proprietorship. That's going to be difficult to do. You're going to be that mom and pop kind of business. You're not going to be able to produce 1,000 shirts in a day. You need to have something bigger, some way of having that more what we think of industrial, that factory kind of setting. So we ended by talking about the corporation. Well, and what we ended with is this. This is absolutely what we're going to start with on Monday, that each of these business types offers some advantage, but we're going to tend to focus on the advantages of the corporation and what that meant for the Industrial Revolution. And you'll see some of these, it might be hard to see, but much more capital, much more expertise are those ones that have the ellipsis dots and the shared workload. And so we will start with this on Monday. There was no homework for Monday, so we'll pick back up with this. I hope that everybody enjoys the rest of their weekend, and I will see you on Monday.